session today is your students and YouTube. Before we get into it though, well actually before I get into this, how many of you currently use YouTube with your classrooms? Okay, great. Because at the end of the session today, I want to have a time of sharing where you're actually sharing your ideas with your colleagues so that we can pass around and steal some ideas. So hopefully, I hope today that I will be giving you some new ideas that you can use, or at least some ideas in which you can create your own ideas off of that that'll work for your classrooms. Okay, so just a few facts about YouTube that you probably already know. It's the world's largest online database. Did you know this? 48 hours of video are uploaded every minute. 48 hours of video. Okay, that's 8 years of content every day. I mean, can you even imagine that? So that is a huge library of knowledge. And one of the things we have to do as teachers is facilitate for our students. How do we swim through all of these videos? How do we find things that are good for us? Okay. So it's also localized in 24 countries. What do I mean by localized?
The servers?
It is available.
Well, it's available in more than 24 countries, but when I say localized, what do you think
Servers, place?
Kind of, exactly. So there's, for example, there's a Ruski YouTube, Espanol YouTube, Francois YouTube, right? So there's 24 countries in which there is their own YouTube in that country. In other parts of the world, they probably will get it in English or a form of a language that's closer to them. Okay? So more than 30 languages. It's an incredible resource. Okay? So today when I'm talking about YouTube, I'm also talking about these sites as well. There's teachertube.com. Has anyone used TeacherTube? Okay. Who? Yes, TeacherTube. What is it?
Well, I didn't figure out how can I use it still.
Oh, okay.
Some pieces of advice were like some kind of recommendations I found, but I didn't use that much.
Okay, TeacherTube you kind of have to poke around. Basically, TeacherTube is YouTube for teachers. So it's a place where teachers can share videos that they have used or videos that they have made, and it's kind of more specialized towards teachers. So even you could upload things or upload projects that you're doing onto TeacherTube and share. But you have to swim around it a bit and figure it out. So one person. Also we have schooltube.com, which is good for your classroom projects. You can go on there and see what other classrooms are doing or other schools. You can add your own content. So it's once again, it's a narrower focus of a YouTube-like database. And then of course, I'm sure most of you know TED.
Yeah.
Have you used TED? It's great, especially for our university students and our more advanced students. So I use all of these in addition to YouTube. Sometimes YouTube can be overwhelming, and sometimes there's just a lot of junk, and it's hard to find things. So these are a little bit more localized, and that's why I like using them. All right. Okay. So, just talking about the benefits for the EFL classroom. We have many. One, we expose our students to authentic English, of course. 2, exposure to world Englishes. What do I mean by this concept of world Englishes?
Australian English, British English.
Yeah, so most people say Australian English, British English, American English, but that's not world Englishes. There's Ukrainian English, there's Indian English, there's French English, okay? Chinese English. So we're trying to prepare our students to communicate not only with native speakers. In fact, most of your students will come into contact with more non-native speakers of English than they will native speakers. So we want to get them ready to not only have an exposure that's intercultural, instead of saying, oh, I just can't understand your English, it's not American, or it's not British, it's just terrible English. Figuring out ways that we can facilitate communication between these two languages. I have to do this every day in my job because I have a classroom of Chinese, Saudis, Omanis, Koreans. They all have their English with their accent and their way of communicating, and it can be difficult and it can break down even if they're speaking the same language, which is English. So exposing our students to these world Englishes, getting them used to hearing and getting them used to knowing that this is not just native speakers we're preparing to speak with and communicate with. I think it's very, very important. Promotes autonomous language learning. Autonomous?
Independent.
Independent. They can do it on their own. Okay. Helps students to connect these foreign language abstracts and puts them into something real. So authenticity again. And it has them use technology. They already use it. They already use YouTube. It's something you don't have to push your students to use because most of your students are using or interacting with some form of an online video database. Probably YouTube, probably, but not all. So it's something, you know, textbooks we got to force our students to open. YouTube, they're already on it. So that's why it's something that works in our favor and it's really good for both us and the students. Okay, and of course we have limitations, and since I work for the Department of State, I have to talk about copyright. I know we're in Ukraine. But I still have to say, especially in the United States, we have certain ways around copyright laws in the United States. If you're a teacher and you're showing something just for your classroom, it can be acceptable to use. You're not really violating a copyright. But it can be
The same as in Ukraine.
the same as in Ukraine. It's a little more free, right? It's a little bit more free.
Teacher becomes the same
Yeah.
for teachers. It's
Yeah. As working for the Department of State, though, I have to say, don't steal videos. But I mean, you're going to do what you're going to do, so just I put it up there. How about that? Okay, so yeah, we have to be careful about that, especially in our country, because there are, you know, they can come after you and get you, especially if it's a YouTube video owned by someone who has a lot of money and is quite commercial. So here, I don't think you have those problems quite as much. So I need a little clicker. Okay, like I said before, since YouTube is so huge, it can be really hard for us to find videos, especially for our beginning students. If we give them an assignment to find a video on YouTube, it can be difficult for them to navigate their way around it. Okay? And then, of course, many times our internet accessibility in our schools and our classrooms is not reliable, or maybe it's non-existent. So how many of you have fairly consistent internet in your classrooms or schools? Yeah, most of you do. Okay, in the school. Most of you do not. So the activities that I'll give you today, you'll have to figure out ways around them. There's always ways. Students, do your students have access to internet in their homes or outside of school?
Yes.
Could you say that 90% of them do?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a good thing. We can still do these activities because a lot of these activities we can do outside of class. And in fact, most of these activities I do outside of class.